One of the main responsibilities of an MDS coordinator is to know how and when to schedule the MDS assessments. As a new coordinator, you'll need to quickly master the skill so that you're able to ensure that your facility maintains regulatory compliance. The effects of not knowing how and even scheduling incorrectly can have significant impacts on compliance, care, reimbursement, and facility level information reported to public consumers. So on this video, I'm going to give you my top 3 tips to help you master the MDS schedule.
No Stress, MDS, with Mike D. Taking the stress out of MDS, one puzzle piece at a time.
Hey everyone, welcome to No Stress MDS. My name is Mike D. I'm a registered nurse and MDS coordinator, and here on my channel, it's my goal to help those new MDS coordinators out there, or maybe even those who are looking to become one, to learn what they need to know in order to succeed. And I do that by offering videos with tutorials, tips, and tricks that will hopefully help you take the stress out of MDS one puzzle piece at a time. I fully remember when I first started out as an MDS nurse and how completely overwhelmed I felt trying to remember all of the MDS scheduling rules on top of everything else that I needed to learn in order to start performing my job correctly. If you've spent any amount of time in the MDS coordinator role already, you've probably already picked up on some newer terms and acronyms that you might not have been exposed to in previous nursing positions. Now, for me, the quickest thing that helped me to start becoming successful in the role of the MDS coordinator was to understand these new acronyms, terms, and concepts that were outlined in the manual. And it was essential for me to have an understanding of these things before I began mastering the MDS schedule. Now, the best way to familiarize yourself with these new terms and definitions is to read, and I'm sure you already guessed it, the REI Manual. Now, reading the REI Manual is something you're going to have to do in order to successfully and properly implement the resident assessment instrument in your facility. But when it pertains to MDS scheduling, you're going to specifically want to read Chapter 2, which is the scheduling chapter. The first term and acronym you're going to want to get a handle on is the ARD, or the Assessment Reference Date. When reading through Chapter 2 about the different assessment types and the scheduling rules, you're going to quickly see that this date plays a key role in both scheduling and completing the MDS. You'll see that this date is used to determine when certain assessments are due next, or at least when they need to be scheduled next. It also will tell you, for most assessments, when the assessment needs to be completed, because typically there's a time frame after the ARD for when an assessment needs to be completed. And then in terms of actually collecting the data and completing the MDS, this date is crucial because it tells the end point of the observation period, and it will let the assessors know the point in which they determine or calculate their look-back periods. So you must understand the concept of the assessment reference date, or the ARD, in order to schedule the MDS assessments. You're going to also want to understand the concept of an assessment window, which really is the meat and potatoes of scheduling the MDS. Other terms and definitions you'll want to get under your belt include things such as a discharge or an LOA, and even how that impacts the MDS cycle, and even an admission. In fact, I have assisted several nursing facilities over the years where the MDS coordinator did not have a clear understanding of what defined an admission, resulting in an incorrect scheduling of the MDS assessments and a lot of unnecessary time completing new admission assessments when they were not required according to the REI guidelines. This is why one of the first things I cover with new MDS coordinators I'm training is the definitions, and specifically the definition for an admission. Another tip to help you master scheduling the MDS assessments is knowing the difference between OBRA required assessments and PPS required assessments. All of the information you need to know about the OBRA and PPS required assessments can be found in Chapter 2 of the REI Manual. Again, this is your scheduling chapter. It provides you with all of the detailed information and guidelines for when you should schedule the assessments, how soon you need to complete them, and then even when they should be transmitted by. Something that I found to be very helpful when I first started out as an MDS coordinator was to make a copy of the MDS summary tables found in Chapter 2. These assessment tables provide a clear snapshot of the various assessment types and the requirements for each assessment, including things such as when to schedule the ARD, the different look-back periods and how they're defined, completion timeframes, transmission timeframes, options to combine, and even info on regulatory requirements. It literally condenses most of the information that you need to know to schedule all of these assessments. Simply put, OBRA is for everyone and PPS is for Medicare. Now, clearly there's a lot more to that oversimplification, but thinking of it in that light at least starts to steer you in the right direction. Whenever I train new MDS coordinators, I always have them think about these types of assessments in this way. You have two different locomotives. You have your OBRA train, which every resident who is sleeping in a Medicaid and or Medicare certified bed is a passenger on. And then you have your PPS train, which the only residents who are riding this train are those who are actively utilizing their Medicare Part A benefit. So I'm talking about your skilled residents. Now, there are many managed care organizations out there that do require nursing facilities to complete the PPS assessments as a condition for payment, and it's usually the 5-day assessments, with some of them occasionally requiring the completion of interim payment assessments. Now, when I'm referring to PPS required assessments, I'm talking about the assessments in which CMS mandates nursing facilities to complete and transmit or submit to the federal repository. Now, these are for residents who are utilizing their Medicare Part A benefit in your nursing facility. So it's not referring to residents who come in utilizing their Medicare replacement plans. So understanding which train track your resident is on is important for scheduling, but you're also going to have to know, going with the train theme again, what cargo each train carries. For example, I know that my OBRA train carries the admission assessments, the annuals, quarterlies, significant changes, entries, discharges, death in facilities, significant corrections, and these are assessments that every resident will need performed periodically and when applicable. Whereas my PPS train carries the Medicare 5-day assessments, the interim payment assessments, and end of PPS assessments. So now when I'm looking at my residents, I need to make sure they're getting the correct assessments scheduled based on the trains they're riding. Now, there are situations where these two trains will get on the same track, in which, if the conditions are correct, assessments can be combined. For example, when a new resident admits to my facility utilizing their Medicare Part A benefit and remains there for longer than 14 days, I am required to complete two different assessments. The first one being an OBRA-required admission assessment, and then the second one being a PPS-required 5-day assessment. So it's those two different trains that are ending up on the same track, and I am instructed in the REI Manual to combine these two assessments together as both assessment windows overlap. This leads me to my final tip for mastering the MDS schedule, and that's to learn and understand the combination guidelines and the completion requirements and deadlines. Understanding the combination guidelines and the completion requirements and deadlines is something you're going to want to try to learn early on as an MDS coordinator, as it's not only going to help you with maintaining compliance, but it's also going to help you save a lot of time and save you from a lot of unneeded stress. Going back to the example that I just gave you regarding the new Medicare admission. Now, if you didn't have an understanding of the assessment combination guidelines, you would end up completing two different assessments for that resident. You would first complete an admission assessment, and then you would complete a standalone 5-day assessment. But having an understanding of the assessment combination guidelines, you would know that you could combine those two assessments together, therefore saving you a lot of unnecessary time spent completing two separate assessments. Like the combination guidelines, understanding the completion requirements and deadlines for the assessments is going to help you master the MDS schedule, but it's also going to help you to work smarter and not harder. Knowing when an assessment doesn't have to be scheduled and completed is just as important as knowing when one does need to be scheduled and completed. Let me give you a couple examples where having this knowledge is going to help you schedule MDS assessments. Let's say you have a new resident who admits to your facility, Mrs. Smith we'll call her. Mrs. Smith admits to your facility on July 18th, 2023, but discharges home 7 days later, resulting in a stay less than 14 days. In this situation, the guidelines state that we are not required to complete the OBRA admission assessment, but instead we would proceed with an OBRA discharge, and obviously a Medicare 5-day assessment may need to be completed as well within its prescribed window, depending on the circumstances. This concept also applies to other OBRA required assessments when a resident either discharges or dies within the completion window. For example, let's say you have a resident, Mr. Smith, who signs on the hospice on June 10th. You go ahead and you schedule a significant change in status assessment for him 5 days after the enrollment date. But unfortunately, Mr. Smith expires on June 20th, which is less than 14 days since a significant change in hospice enrollment. Again, in this situation, the assessment does not need to be completed because he had died during the completion window. Instead, if we choose not to complete that assessment, the manual instructs us to store any portion of the resident's assessment that was already previously completed in the medical record and update the resident's record with a notation explaining why the assessment was not completed. You can see in these two scenarios how understanding the completion requirements is going to be beneficial for you as you learn to master the MDS schedule. I hope that you find these tips useful as you begin to master the MDS schedule. And if you have any tips that you would like to share, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for joining me on this video. And if you have found any of this information to be helpful, I would greatly appreciate it if you would click on that thumbs up button. Please consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the notifications bell so that you won't miss any future content. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for No Stress, MDS. If you have suggestions for topics you would like to see covered, we would love to hear from you. For additional resources, education, and MDS merchandise, you can find us on the web at www.nostressmds.com. Until next time, remember, you can take the stress out of MDS by putting the puzzle together, one piece at a time.